Connor, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
And the first line of your book, Men's Work, is that a man's work begins in pain. Why is that?
Oh boy. Well, I think for many, many reasons, a man's work begins in pain because to start, a man's pain is usually what he's avoiding. And when we avoid things in ourselves, those things control us. They take over our lives. They start to direct us, right? So Carl Jung had a great line. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Right. So until we make these things that we're avoiding conscious, they call the shots, right? There's another gentleman named Francis Weller who says your pain has its own intelligence. So a lot of the men that I have worked with over the last, 10, 11, 12 years, the challenges that they're facing is that they've been carrying around inside of them a very deep pain from, childhood, being abandoned by their fathers, being neglected, being abused, going through a brutal divorce, being whatever it is, but they're carrying around a pain that society and other men haven't shown them how to deal with. And and then they're constantly sabotaging. They can't stop watching porn, they're high all the time, they're drunk, they're cheating on their partners. And and when you ask them, why are you doing that? The answer is almost always, I don't really know. I don't really know why I'm doing it. And I really don't know why I can't stop. And so that's the unconscious, right? That's what Jung was talking about. That's what a lot of people have talked about. And the truth of it, I'll just give you one last piece and then I'll hand the torch back. But what I work with a lot of men on is being able to work with their body, get in out of their head and into their body, because I usually will say that, like, your body is the vessel of your unconscious mind. So where does all that pain live? It lives in your body. And we know this now, right? This isn't like some spiritual woo-woo esoteric comment. It's actually scientific research that has shown that we hold our trauma, our pain, physically in our body. And so when we are using the porn, the weed, the booze, the women to alleviate our stress or our anxiety or your loneliness, etc., that's your body literally hijacking your brain, right? Like, your body actually just takes over and says, like, okay, I've had enough, let's go smoke that joint. All right, I've had enough, let's go watch the porn. And you're like, oh no, I said I wasn't going to do that, like, I'm doing this whole no fap thing. And it's like, boom, you're hijacked, you're done, the browser's open, right? You're watching something and all of a sudden you're down the rabbit hole. And so that's why a man's work begins with pain, because until you start to look at your pain, you are just going to continue to be hijacked and be out of control in your own life. And for me, it's about, how do you move back to a self-led place? How do you lead yourself as a man? And you can't lead yourself effectively in your finances, in your health, in your relationship, in your sex life, in your career or purpose, until you get to the core of what's sabotaging you, and that's your pain.
When you say the term unconscious, you also named a number of pains which, if somebody did the work, they might quickly establish that obviously that is what is wrong. And obvious sounds a bit unfair, doesn't it? Of course, you had a really troublesome childhood and you didn't have a father figure, you didn't have a role model, you were maybe abused, or perhaps you had a really tumultuous romantic relationship that went terribly wrong. And ever since, you've looked for comfort or sedation from other means that you've named there. But many people, and I think the issue is, it remains in the subconscious because they don't go back to try and establish, why am I behaving this way, and understanding what their drivers are.
Hmm. Yeah. So you don't have to have had something quote unquote traumatic happened to have pain, right? I think that's the really important thing. Like, some people will listen to that and be like, well, I actually had a pretty good childhood and my family was, pretty normal. But I still find myself constantly out of control and not able to like get my shit together. And that's because these things are sometimes subtle, right? You can have had great parents and a great childhood and still have experienced painful things or interruptions into your own development as a child that cause patterns in your life. And so, yeah, when those things happen, right, you get bullied at school, whatever it is that you experienced, our brain is this beautiful, and our body is this beautiful mechanism of storing information. I mean, think about your brain and your body are sort of like a hard drive. And the way that I like to put it is that your brain is the conscious hard drive. So you can access those memories very quickly. You can access those experiences, what it was like, what you said, what you did. And then your body is the unconscious hard drive. And so everything that you don't want to remember, everything that you didn't like, everything that you're embarrassed about, all the stuff that you're like, oh, that sucked, or I shouldn't have said that, that all gets imprinted onto your unconscious hard drive, and that's your body. And then we have certain coping mechanisms in order to sort of keep those unsavory memories and experiences from popping up into our conscious mind. And so that's why a lot of people are struggling with things like anxiety and stress. Those things are just stored energy, right? Like anxiety is less of an emotion than it is an access or excess of energy trapped in your body. That's really what anxiety is. It's just all of this energy suddenly comes up in your body. Your brain becomes aware of it, and that creates a certain level of like panic, as an example. But
It has huge
neurologically,
overlaps with excitement as well, doesn't it? Which I think can
totally.
be quite a reassuring thing for somebody that feels anxiety.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And like neurologically, the neurons and the pathways that fire in your brain between excitement and anxiety are almost identical, right? But it's just being miscoded because when you're feeling anxious, it's so much energy that your brain's like, oh shit, I don't know what to do with this. How do I navigate it? And so, anyway, that's just a bit of a side tangent. Hopefully, I answered your initial question.
Yeah, you certainly did. And I think it is important to underline that, as you say, it doesn't have to be like an outrageous, traumatic, like high level event that causes you to be a man that sits in pain up until this point. But
Mhm.
it could well be something like that, or it could be something on a potentially more minor level, in quote unquote quotes. But at the same time, it's still ruminating back there. It's still stored, and it's leading to some of these self-sabotage behaviors, some of these sedation behaviors, some of these behaviors that you don't want to do as a self-led man. It's one of your terms, or basically somebody that listens to a podcast like this one that wants to be autonomous, that wants to lead and really live a fully aligned life as well. And when you understand where the trigger points are for these negative behaviors, I completely agree that it's a considerably more empowering place to be than if you continue to maybe just try and, oh, I'm just going to design my environment slightly better so that I don't click on the porn browser, or I don't reach for the vape, or I don't reach for the cigarette, or I don't reach for the drink every weekend. That is a small part of the puzzle. And I think the contribution of work like yours, Connor, is that, okay, there's other things going on that are pushing me to do these things beyond just trying to nail James Clear's
Mm.
Atomic Habits and his guidance.
Yeah. Yeah, I interviewed James Clear when his book first came out like ages ago before it blew up and sold however many millions of copies. And it's like, man, that book really rocked it. But yeah, I mean, we have to be able to get to, you can prune the tree as much as you want, but if the roots are decaying or they're struggling, or they're growing into places that they shouldn't, then you're never going to get rid of the core of the problem, right? And so what a lot of people do is they try and prune the tree. They try and shift their external habits and install porn blockers and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that that doesn't help. That absolutely can help, but it should coincide with some type of depth work, some type of, okay, I'm going to do the really hard thing that I don't want to do. And we know that when you do the hard thing that you don't want to do, that's where growth happens. Like I always say, there's no change without confrontation. There's no growth without confrontation. And that confrontation is usually uncomfortable. It's frustrating. It can be timely. It can take time and longer than we want it to take. I mean, when I tried quitting porn because I really had a problem with it for a long time, I mean, it took me like a year and a half, maybe 2 years to actually stop watching it. And it was frustrating. And I was like, what the hell's wrong with me that I can't stop watching? There was so much shame and self-criticism and judgment that was going on. And it was ridiculous. And I remember like trying to watch videos online and nobody was talking about, one, there was very few people talking about quitting porn at that time. And two, nobody was talking about how damn hard it was because of the accessibility and because it has become for most men this super easy coping mechanism that when you're feeling something you don't like, you can just hit the porn reset button, right? So it's like, oh, I'll just watch porn. I'll get off. I'll release a whole bunch of great feel good neurochemicals into my body. And then there we go. So we have to be willing to do really uncomfortable, challenging, confrontational depth work. And if you're willing to do that, then that's where really substantial change will occur.
What do some of those uncomfortable deep work exercises look like, Connor?
I mean, one of them is going out to a men's weekend. I think getting in person with other men and talking about the shit that you have experienced or gone through or are going through and struggling with, that is almost always the most uncomfortable thing for us to do. And it's almost always the most important thing for you to do. And it's the most important thing because until your grief is witnessed, it won't shift. Until your pain is witnessed, it really won't change. There's something about, we are a species, a social species that needs to belong. And when we don't belong, we feel like death, and we've been sort of evolutionarily designed to be in community. Now, we as men have been taught that if you're in pain, you're a pussy. If you're sad and you're crying, that you shouldn't. And can I swear on your podcast? Because I
Of
feel like
course
I've
you
already been
can,
doing that.
Connor.
Okay. I was like, I've just been going for it. But I wanted to check in. If you're in pain, you're a pussy. If you're crying, there's something wrong with you, like that type of stuff. And so we as men have been taught strength through suppression. Strength through suppression. The more you can suppress the stuff that you don't like about yourself, the stuff that you're in pain about, the stuff that makes you sad, then the stronger you'll be. But eventually that cracks every man. Eventually that just breaks down. I've never, ever, ever seen a man that's able to go through life with that as an effective means. So
The whole
you,
coffee cup analogy always rings true to me, Connor. If we keep
yeah,
just pouring coffee and it's going to spill over at some point, regardless of how fast you may be able to drink it down or whatever other analogy you want to use.
yeah, yeah. So you have to be willing to get into a men's group or go to a men's weekend and really start to confront some of these things, bring them out into the open. And a big part of what I think every man needs to do, and what was in my book, was really about shadow work. Carl Jung had this notion of the shadow, and the shadow is in your unconscious. And it's kind of like, I call it the hurt locker, right? It's the place where you store all that pain. You store the shame of, maybe the abuse that you experienced, or not being able to make that relationship work, not being able to sort of get your shit together and constantly feeling like a failure and a fuck up. Like, you store all of that somewhere in yourself, and that's in your shadow. And we as men have very dense shadows. Like, men traditionally will have a sort of thicker, more dense shadow than women, because repression and suppression aren't as active of a way of being within female culture, whereas within male and masculine culture, that's something that's sort of baked into male and masculine culture, right? It's like, avoid those hard things. And I think a lot of guys have misinterpreted what stoicism is. Stoicism is not about ignoring and repressing and suppressing what you're going through and experiencing. It's about being able to witness and acknowledge those things and have the tools and resources to not let those things deter you from moving in the path or direction that you want to go. But it's only through the witnessing of those things that are true within you, the grief, the sadness, the frustration, the anger, the hostility, that you can then move those things to the side, or they dissolve because you've witnessed them and you've shared them, and then you can keep going. So shadow work is a huge, huge part of what I have seen to work for so many men.
It's interesting you say that the shadow in men is greater because there's a culture of suppression. And one of the quotes that I wrote down in advance of this is that you said that men face a conundrum: have your shit together, which would be the whole suppressed thing, but also be able to talk about it when you're struggling. And that is like a really strange development that's happened in modern society, where we have this, oh, let's just talk about our problems. But it's almost it's an olive branch that's offered to men, but not really offered in a truly sincere way that we want them to open up and actually go through with it. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that the likes of yourself and guys like Dr. Robert Glover, Chris Williamson, guys that I really admire in the space, are talking about a practical form of opening up. Because I think if we lead just purely with, let's just talk about our problems, that
Yeah.
doesn't really get us to where we want to get to.
No, I have a whole chapter in the book about the myth of male vulnerability. Like men are really, we're really I really empathize. Man, I am a man, so I know what it feels like, but I'm just talking about us as, as a sex, as a gender. Like men, I think are really in a tough place because there is this myth in modern culture that is really being pushed specifically by women and by feminism, that says, if you just open up about what you're feeling, if you just talk about what you're feeling, it'll solve all your problems. Doesn't matter what you're going through, doesn't matter what you're dealing with. And this is a very female oriented way of therapy, of coaching, of personal development, of solving our problems and issues. And it doesn't work for men. It does to a degree, but it has limitations. Like, we as men, we need to shift, we need to change, we need to take action. There actually has to be some substantial course correction that takes place. And so, but the whole therapeutic industry is really designed in some ways, and I know I'll come back around, I promise. The whole therapeutic industry now has really shifted to this hyper female dominated space, where it's like 80% of therapists are women. And the sort of curriculum of how you work with people is that you get them to share what they're feeling, and then you empathize and acknowledge that what they're feeling is tough, and then you go about your day. And that's not it for men. It's like, that's a part of the process, but we need other steps to say, okay, but that doesn't help me still hate my fucking job. Like that's not making me any more money. I can't pay my bills. It's not helping me support my family. Or, yeah, I'm devastated by the divorce, but like, I've lost my kids and I want to see them. Like, how can I shift that? So we as men, part of it is, yes, we do need to open up and we do need to talk about these things, but we also need more tactical experiences that we can go and deploy.
Practical support, and that's something that I know you've interviewed Adam as well. Adam Lane Smith said a couple of years ago in the podcast, and my audience had a mixed reaction to it at the time, but he said that females in therapy want to be seen and heard, whereas males want to feel useful and have a next step to take on a practical level. And I completely agree with that, and it's exactly what you've articulated there. There's almost that, yes, I want to unload and I want to express myself, but what next? How do I change career? How do I get more access to my kids? How do I feel more fulfilled in my life? How do I feel more useful as a member of society and as a man within my family or whatever area they're spending their time in? And I think that's a key distinction for why maybe we do have this male vulnerability myth where just talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about it. But what next?
Well, I think that I've said this on another show or two before, that always seems to get like a pretty substantial result. But what I've said before is, like, we've entered into one of the first periods of time in human history, as far as I can tell, that what it means to be a good man and what it means to be masculine is not being defined by men. It is largely being defined by the culture, which is female dominated. And so for the first time, women are really, and the feminine is really dictating and governing what it means to be a man, what it means to be a good man, what it means to be masculine. And a lot of men have fallen into this trap of trying to be masculine, be a good man based off of what women say that they want in a man. And that is the antithesis of masculinity. That's actually in opposition to inherent traits and characteristics of masculinity, right? Is that to be masculine is not to be defined externally by other people, regardless of their sex or gender or political preference or whatever. It's that you take the time and the effort to begin to determine who you truly are at your core, regardless of whether or not that gets you social acceptance from other people. So there's a kind of unapologetic nature to it. But, because one in four kids in America, as an example, are growing up without a father figure in the household, we don't have the same type of transmission or modeling of masculinity or what it means to be a man. And so a lot of young boys, they grow up without a father in the house. They go into an education system that's dominated by women, by female teachers. They go through that education system, they come out of it, and then, let's say that they want help. They go into a therapeutic industry and system that, again, is largely dominated by women. And so we've strip mined really good, healthy, masculine male role models out of our culture, out of our systems, out of our education system, out of our healing systems or modalities. And so men, like I have this saying, this is probably going to be controversial a little bit, but I have this saying that, like, if you want to sum up modern dating in today's world, modern dating and relationships, it's just drills down to the fact that women are delusional and men are disenfranchised. That, like, women's expectations have become so wild. Everybody wants somebody over 6 feet tall making $1 million, and men are so disenfranchised because they're like, well, I'm the problem for absolutely everything in society and culture, and so I'm checked out entirely from culture, society, education, economics, dating, the whole thing. I'm just out. And so you see this really big division. So I think a lot of men are really, they're really struggling to find a footing. So I know I just laid a lot out there. So I'll
Disenfranchised is
pause.
the right term, though, Connor. And let's maybe pick on that thread a little bit, because you share statistics around the number of men that are single, which is higher than ever before, and that's single through choice to some extent because they feel disenfranchised. So there's almost not the same level of effort to pursue a partner because they don't feel they meet certain criteria that they feel that they need to. The whole over 6 foot earning six figures, as you were alluding towards, and that's a really problematic environment because for the future of our species, we certainly need to be dating and in stable environments, and stable environments raise stable children, which of course continues on and on and on down the line.
Hmm.
But as you're saying, 1 in 4 households are growing up without the influence of a father figure, and that leads to the kind of perpetual cycle of potentially weak, unguided men that don't have that real model figure. And I know that I'm very fortunate in the household that I grew up in, but some of my friends that have gone through a fatherless household, they've really had to turn to like almost online mentors or sports coaches or somebody that's external. And
Yeah.
that's not available to everyone. And they've almost been the fortunate ones that have come across that mentor figure.
Yeah. I mean, when you have to, like, again, I'll say it as many times as necessary, but masculinity is something that is built and transmitted. Femininity and womanhood is something that you are born with and that evolves naturally. And so, and this is something that I think oftentimes women don't really understand, or they kind of grasp, or they try and negate. And, I think there's this whole, conversation online of like, women are born with value, men have to develop it, men have to earn it, men have to build it. I think that's a bit of a separate conversation. But masculinity specifically is something that is transmitted, something that we see, it's something that we witness, it's something that we experience, and then we grapple with that and we have to develop it ourselves. And there's a reason why, if you look back throughout history, pretty much every single culture in the history of human beings has had initiatory practices to help boys cross the threshold into manhood. Why? There's a reason for that. And when you strip that out of culture and society, and you stop creating spaces for boys to become men, and you stop creating opportunities for boys to go through an initiatory experience to enter into manhood, you stifle the ability for men to be men. You stifle the ability for boys to know what it looks like to be a man who treats women well, who knows how to deal with his anger, who knows how to deal with his grief and sadness, who knows how to interact with other men, who knows how to find fulfillment and adventure out into the world. And you start to produce men who, like we've seen in our modern culture, right? The Homer Simpson, Peter Griffins, these like fat, overweight, like totally checked out, no backbone, no spine, no real direction or motivation. They're just not role models. And so they're not people that a young boy can look up to and be like, whoa, there's a mountain I want to climb. And that's really what a healthy, powerful male role model is meant to be. Like, I have a 3.5-year-old son. I'm 40 and I'm in the best goddamn shape of my life. And I will be in the best shape of my life come hell or high water, because I want him to have a a view of what it takes to sharpen and mold yourself into somebody who appreciates themselves, has respect for themselves, not just in my finances, not just in my health, but with how I treat my wife, with how I interact with my friends. Like I just flew out to Colorado to go and see a buddy of mine because he's going through a really hard time. And so for me, it's like how I operate in the world as a man is a representation of masculinity. And it's a transmission to my son and all of the men of this is how you can move through the world and
You're leading
operate.
by example, Connor. And I really like that you brought up health. I like that you brought up wealth, but I really value and appreciate that you brought up things like how you behave towards your wife, how you behave towards your friends, because many of the online masculine role models that we have are doubling down in two particular areas,
Right.
wealth and health, which I appreciate. However, they're also doubling down when it comes to maybe like promiscuity with women and
Yeah.
like
But
the
also,
whole.
but also pushing the family system is absolutely everything. And it's like, okay.
It's a
uh,
conflicting message. Now, don't get me wrong. I think some of these creators have contributed well to the space because they brought the conversation into a sharper focus. But
yes.
when I see somebody like yourself, and the reason that I would love to interview somebody like you is because you bring this more nuanced, more holistic approach to it, where you're talking about family values and actually embodying them. And embodiment is something we've already spoken about in terms of the body and the mind. And I really, really think that when you have somebody you can look up to and say, okay, he's living in alignment as a man and I admire his traits as well as maybe the tokens that he can hold up and flash at me. I think that's really, really valuable to have as well. And if that comes from your father, fantastic. But I also know that during your hard period, you had older mentors as well that you managed to seek out as well. So it can be found from other sources, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the internet and social media, it's made it very easy to have that sort of like big brother figure or that father figure. Like I said, I've been saying for years, the reason why Jordan Peterson got so big was he was the embodiment of the father archetype that so many young men and young women had been missing for so long. He wasn't saying crazy shit. He was saying, make your bed, stand up straight. Like he was saying like literally the most basic
Tell the
things
truth.
that you would hear from your dad, right? Tell the truth, make your bed, do like have some discipline. And so I think that it's created access, and that can be super, super helpful, to have men like that. And I'm not saying that Jordan Peterson is, the greatest thing or anything like that. I'm just saying that for a lot of people, it's men like that who they can look up to it. Like they can turn to it for advice. Now, I don't think that that replaces having good men in your life. And I think that that's something that we have to figure out. Like for me, I've never really turned to online spaces because I recognize I've been very fortunate that I've had a series of older men in my life who have been exceptional mentors, and they've all been in their 70s, which has been really weird. Like, I don't know, I don't know what it is that I seem to like attract these sort of like grandfather, you know, just sort of elder, right? They're all elders. And I think that that's something so rare in our culture that we have a lot of old men, but we don't have a lot of elder men. And there's such a fundamental difference that
Wisdom really is the big differentiator, isn't it?
yeah, if you meet a 70-year-old guy and he's still getting, shit faced on the weekends and his finances are a mess and he's not healthy and his relationships is a disaster and he's constantly bitching about his wife that he's been married to for 40 years. It's like,
Doesn't see his kids. Yeah, I'm on
he doesn't
board.
see his kids. You're like, you're an old man. You're not an elder, like, and it's not to discard that person. It's not to say you don't have value in the world. It's just simply to say, I'm probably not going to turn to you for advice and insight on how to rectify my own life. And so, I've been fortunate that I've had 4 or 5 older men in my life that are really elders that had a lot of wisdom they shared with me. And I've been fortunate to actually apprentice with them, which I think I'll just say one quick piece on this. I think that apprenticeship and real mentorship is going to be the way of the future. I think that as AI comes online and you have like a professor in your pocket for absolutely any academic pathway that you want to go down, you'll literally be able to use AI to learn quantum mechanics and whatever the hell you want. I think that real apprenticeship and in-person mentorship is going to really expand. And so if you're looking at a career path for yourself that you want to safeguard against, things like AI and in the coming waves that are happening, go and apprentice with some exceptional people. And that's what I did. I paid money to go and apprentice with exceptional people. I don't have a degree in psychology, but I run one of the largest therapeutic companies for men now. So so there's more than one pathway. I was just going to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely, Connor. I agree so strongly. One of the bits that makes me laugh about your content in your book every time I reflect on it is that you have one rule for men, and it links into what we've been talking about there, where almost like Fight Club, men aren't allowed to talk about the fact that they're struggling. But when we've talked about this juxtaposition between the feminine encouraging this just talk environment, and we're talking about men actually having to more practical step to it as well, I actually found a viral clip that you'd shared. It's from Pastor Kenyon Henderson, and he's
Mm.
speaking about when a man opens up, when he really opens up, don't use what was said when he opened up to win an argument down the line. And the reason that clip's gone so viral and people like you have commented on it and spoken about it is because it's so relatable that when we do expose ourselves to maybe the women in our lives or other people in our lives, sometimes that can be thrown back, and that is the most hurtful thing of all, and we really close off thereafter.
Yeah, I mean, women don't have a lot of practice being able to receive a man's transparency and vulnerability. I think for a lot of women, it's something that they say they want, and then it comes up and out, like a man does open up and be vulnerable. And then it can really cause a lot of disturbances or shifts within that woman because it's not what she's used to seeing. And it can cause her to, yeah, I mean, look, I'll say it from a different way. Every man ever knows that there's a risk to being vulnerable. That risk might be that your partner loses sexual attraction, that she pulls away, that she closes down. That risk might mean that like your buddies make fun of you or you get ostracized. There are a ton of inherent risks for men to quote unquote open up. And, that's why we have that one rule of men, which is don't talk about, whatever it is that you're going through. Like maybe talk about the details of like, oh yeah, the divorce is happening, or yeah, I got fired from my job. But don't talk about, oh, I'm devastated by this divorce. Like I'm really having a hard time because I can't see my kids and it's fucking breaking me, and so that part kind of gets excluded from the conversation because we as men haven't, we've again, well, we stripped mined out spaces for boys and men in culture, and we took out initiation. We also took out the places where men would gather and the traditions of men gathering and talking openly with one another about what they've been going through, what they're dealing with. It's been very common that men have had very strong community where a son could turn to a father or an uncle for something that they were going through. So I think that there's a big risk in men opening up. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. I think that you absolutely should do it in the right spaces and places. There is such a thing as sharing too much too soon, too quickly, and sometimes when guys start down this path, or they've been burned in their relationship before, and it's why they won't open up and talk to other people about it, because they shared and then they had a woman that turned around a week later and used what they said against them, and it was kind of like another knife in the heart. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that again then. I'm not going to
I
tell you how I
agree,
really
because
feel.
down the line in that clip, many people won't have watched the full clip because they've got TikTok brain. They've scrolled on to the next thing and they just like the first few sentences. But down the line in that clip, he says, "When you ask me how I am, I'm going to say good. I'm not good, but I'm just not telling you."
Right.
And that for me is the perfect illustration of if you open up perhaps in the wrong environment to the wrong person at the wrong time, and all these three variables can be different, you do leave yourself open to that opening up being like you burn your hand on the stove and monkey see, monkey do. I'm not going to touch that stove anymore because it's hot and it's going to hurt me. So when somebody asks me how things are going with work or the divorce or whatever topic we want to bring up, you have this like little scripted short answer you give to try and palm it off and bounce it back, rather than,
Yeah.
as you said, having, and I hate the term safe space to some extent because it's become very woke nowadays, but it's relevant in this discussion. But having that arena where you can have a conversation and actually explain what's going on to somebody that you trust, that is going to listen to you, give you the space, and then potentially share experiences that they've had, how they relate, how they can get that same vibe. I think that's what we are craving on such a big level, Connor.
Yeah, I mean, men crave depth. We crave depth. You just look at the lives of men, and they're always trying to move towards the depth of something, right? The depth of a connection, the depth of a relationship, the depth of, an expertise or a career. And those things are hard, right? There's a ton of effort that has to go into reaching those depths. And I think we also want depth of friendship within the men in our lives, and that's hard to curate. um, it's not easy. However, I think that pretty much all men desire and crave to have the type of friendship with another man, or a group of men, where there's nothing held back. That this notion of like iron sharpens iron that everybody's heard of. It's like, well, in order for that to happen, you're probably going to have to share some really tough shit about yourself that you're not proud of, that you don't like, that that's really brutal for you to share. And you're probably going to have to receive some really tough feedback, guidance, uh, or to just let yourself be witnessed. To have a buddy of yours say like, "Man, that sucks, and I can't believe you went through that, and thank you so much for sharing that with me." And so those are the types of experiences and friendships that we have to start to curate as men, and they're not easy, and that's the point. Right? Like really great things in life are things that we have to work for and fight for and lean into. And friendships with other men is no different. It's easy to have the buddies that you go to the bar with and you drink the beer and you watch UFC. It's harder to have the boys where you're like, I can talk about absolutely anything with that guy, anything. And there's a freedom and a liberation that comes along with that, that again, the masculine in us craves. The masculine craves freedom in all ways, in all walks of life. It doesn't want to feel constrained or tied down, and we don't want to feel like that either in our friendships.
One of the really masculine traits that I value in myself and my closest friends is the ability to be disagreeable. And it's the opposite of having yes men in your corner, because you were saying there that iron sharpens iron would infer that maybe if I share that I'm planning on launching this course off the back of the podcast and I want to share it with my audience and I've got these visions for it and it's going to do this, it's going to be this helpful.
Hmm.
If I don't take action on that, I expect my closest friends to call me on my bullshit and be like, Colin, you said you were going to do this. You said you were going to do that. Where did it go? In the same way, we've all got that friend that, oh yeah, I'm done with the whole casual drinking thing every weekend and getting a bit fucked up and coasting through my job. In fact, I'm really going to double down on my health and my fitness, and I'm going to be at a run club on a Sunday, and I'm going to be in the gym on the Monday morning with you training legs, and we're going to start doing more stuff. But they keep flaking.
Hmm.
So I would rather have people in my circle that are masculine enough to disagree with how I've actually gone on to conduct myself than just nodding along and what I would call being an enabler in low functioning habits over a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to decide how you want to move through life, right? It's like, do you care about excellence, or is mediocrity something that you're fine with? My guess is that no man is really fine, is really okay with mediocrity. And there's value, how do I want to say this? There's value in being able to call one another forward. I have just created a distinction between calling somebody out and calling them forward. Usually calling somebody out is about you and your personal ego. It's like, oh, I called them out. It's like, okay, good for you. Calling somebody forward is more about them and who they have said they want to be, right? So if you have a buddy that's like, I want to stop drinking and I want to get in better health, you're not doing him any favors by going out and getting shit faced with him and not being like, yo, bro, like you said you're going to stop drinking. Here you are 3 beers in. Like, what's going on? calling him forward is, hey, you said you were going to stop drinking. What's going on? I noticed that you had 2 or 3 beers tonight. Are you talking to me again about going out and like, pounding back whiskey? Like, what's happening? What's happening to your goals? And holding somebody accountable to what they said they were going to do. And I think that this is how the masculine shows it gives a shit about somebody else, is that I care enough about you to have what is an uncomfortable conversation, probably for the both of us, to be like, man, I care about you. What's going on? You said you're going to do this. Or, hey, you said you're going to quit watching porn. How's that actually going? And then to press in enough to be like, are you really not watching it, or are you feeding me smoke right now? Like, are you actually, have you actually done what you said you're going to do? Because for most men, they're so lonely in their lives that they have given up on being transparent and honest, even with other men. And when you lack that type of male accountability in your life, you're fucked. Like, you're fucked, because you will justify anything. Your brain, your rational mind will justify anything.
We
And
become the
so,
hero in our own story. I completely agree.
totally
Or there'll be some reason. I think it's why you said that accountability piece. I think that's why people respond so well to coaching when it comes to health and fitness, when it comes to money
right.
and mindset, when it comes to business. And you can expand that out to men's work as well. I think people respond really well to having somebody on their shoulder. They're almost paying to have that accountability buddy that they haven't been able to find outside of that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, accountability is, and it's not like, I think everybody thinks about accountability as like, you're going to help me do the thing that I say I want to do, versus you are going to check. I'm going to do it. It's 100% my responsibility, but you're going to care enough to hold my feet to the fire while I go through with it. It's like, I use the skydiving analogy, right? It's like, you're going to jump out of the plane, but I'm going to be right there to be like, don't back off. Don't see, like, sit down if you need to sit down, edge yourself out, like whatever you need to do, but don't back off. But it's not my job to kick you out. It's my job. It's not my job to push you out of the plane. Maybe I need to skydive with you first so you can get the hang of it, and then you can throw yourself out. Like, maybe that's what needs to happen. But that's more of a coaching relationship than it is maybe a friendship.
Yeah, I completely see that. On a practical level, Connor, you shared before that you took 5 actions to unfuck your life. And I think that's a big graphic headline for a lot of people. What were the most important steps within that?
I mean, plain and simple, the base one is just telling the truth, just like foundational. I was like pretty chronic at lying to the people in my life and to myself. And my favorite, I say favorite now, I can talk about it that way, but my favorite go-to method of lying was just lying through omission. It's like, maybe if I don't admit to that, maybe if I don't talk about that, if I don't bring that detail forward in my relationship or to my friends, like, it won't be that big of a deal. So I did what I just called autocorrect every day, all day. Like, I literally, it was almost like I was listening to everything that I was saying and catching myself in the bullshit. It's like, oh, I just lied there. Okay, let me correct myself real time in the moment to this person. Be like, oh, you know what? Sorry, that's not right. This is the real fact, or this is really what happened. Or, you know what? I was embellishing on that story. Here's what really happened. And I just got really brutal at doing this autocorrect method for months, until I found that I had largely stopped lying at all, where I was just telling the truth. And it was just like, that's the fact, that's the fact, that's the fact, that's what happened. And that radically changed my life. Now, what I will say is, again, there is such a thing as too much, too soon, too quickly. And so if you're a guy that's out there listening and you're like about to go gangbusters on honesty, and you've been holding all of this shit in your life, you really have to make a decision of, if you bring all of that stuff out all at once, you might blow up some stuff in your life. And maybe that's what needs to happen. But what I did was, just through this, my life had already blown up. Like, all the lies had already come out. So I'll just preface that part. But this autocorrect method was one of the best things that I could possibly recommend.
I really like that. And I like the gradual element to it as well, because as you say, if there's certain things that have been hidden away from sight. And if you suddenly unveil them like a whole ta-da, it could cause an awful lot of pain for those around you. So building up and perhaps not lying about new things to get started and working on that and building out is really helpful too. And I know you speak about that gradual approach from like a generative versus degenerative habits perspective as well, because as you say, you maybe have certain vices or certain crutches. If you scrap them all at once,
Yeah.
that could maybe lead to like all sorts of withdrawals or pains that are even more painful than it needs to be. And yes, there must be some pain. I think that's, as you've really clearly articulated, it's vital that we have that pain. But if you quit everything cold turkey, lying and whatever other crutches you have so quickly, it can be really problematic too.
Yeah, and I think I'll add one or two more other things in there that I think are really helpful for the majority of men. One is dealing with the inner critic, and the other one is replacing coping mechanisms with generative habits. So when I started doing a lot of work on myself and trying to get my shit together, I was a mess. I had so many coping mechanisms like porn, weed, booze, women, sexting. I mean, it was just like off the charts. And it was really frustrating because I had the thing that happens to most guys, which is like, man, I don't even know where to start. Like it's like walking into a hoarder's house and you're just like, well, this is a disaster. Like, and maybe the people listening aren't that bad, like maybe you're out there listening and you're like, well, thank God my life isn't like what yours was 10,
It's all
12 years ago.
relative though, Connor, isn't it?
Totally.
There'll be somebody listening will have two or three things that they want to rectify, and you're going
Right.
to speak to that.
Yeah. And so start by choosing one coping mechanism and decide to replace it with what I call a generative habit. And a generative habit is something that reinforces your own worth, your own values, your own substance. It's something that gives back and replenishes you. So let's just say porn, as an example, is a coping mechanism, or weed is a coping mechanism, and you want to replace those with some generative habit like meditation, like breath work, like yoga, like working out, like journaling. I mean, the list can just go on and on and on. So what I would recommend you do is that you choose that one thing. Okay. So let's say porn, and you want to replace it with meditation. And I recommend meditation or breath work as the generative habit to replace porn. And here's why. Most men can't quit porn because their nervous system has become so wired to using porn to feel better. And so for a lot of guys, they're feeling something before they want to watch porn that's not arousal or horniness, right? They're feeling lonely, bored, stressed out, anxious, angry, disconnected from their girlfriend or wife,
Uncertainty as well is huge.
uncertainty, right? They're like, I don't know where the fuck life is going. And that experience, that feeling happens inside, and they're like, I don't want to feel that, so I'm going to go use porn. Versus you beginning to develop a method of expanding your tolerance or your threshold of that experience, right? And so, what I recommend to most guys, every single time you want to watch porn, you set a timer and you sit down and you either do the breath work or you do the meditation. And you begin to acclimate your body to being able to, quote unquote, down regulate your nervous system when you're having that internal experience, so that you learn how to actually feel that feeling, have that experience without needing some external substance or behavior in order to help you feel better. You can do that within yourself through the meditation, through the breath work. The breath is the really important part, whether you do meditation or breath work. It is the modulating dial for your nervous system. So if you're stressed or anxious or lonely or uncertain, those are all states that your nervous system will move into. It's called a sympathetic dominant state. Basically, it's a stress state, and all the stress, chemicals move through your body. The breath is the modulating dial that helps you to down regulate and move into a more relaxed state, a more calm state. So that's replacing a coping mechanism, a generative habit. The other one is dealing with the inner critic. I have found that every man that I have ever worked with has a brutal inner dialogue, brutal. And it's it's different for every guy. For some guys, it's more shaming. For some guys, it's more like laziness and lethargy. And other guys, it's just like pure verbal abuse, and that was me. Like my inner dialogue was just like this abusive character. And the interesting thing about the inner dialogue is that inner critic is oftentimes your inner authority. And so the reason why so many men have problems holding themselves accountable, doing the things that they say they want to do, et cetera, is that their inner authority has been co-opted or conscripted by the critic. And so a lot of their authoritarian, maybe authoritarian has a bad rap, but a lot of their more authoritative, there we go,
Assertive, yeah.
yeah, assertive traits have been conscripted by that character. So there's a whole section in my book that you can go check out, exercises for you to do to reclaim it. But the end game is that you repurpose that inner critic towards something that is actually supporting your goals and behaviors. Think of it as like a loyal soldier that has not been trained properly, and so it's moving you down a path of destruction instead of building something.
I really like the reframing of it. And I've had guests before that have talked about the whole distancing piece from the inner critic as well. Like the whole Jordan Peterson rule too is, would you like give the advice that you would give to your friend if they were in the same circumstances? You probably wouldn't shout at your friend and belittle them and tear
Right.
them down. So if you can distance yourself and try and almost other and be a third person in that regard, that can be really helpful too. But I love the reframing as well. The only other question I've got for you in our time together, Connor, is just around the rise of angry male online content creators. And we've mentioned role models like Jordan Peterson, who is a massive positive force, in my opinion, and I suspect yours as well. What's going on in that space that's led us to almost fill that void with these kind of shouty, angry guys?
Yeah, I mean, I did like a little convo on this. I think when first off, some of those guys really appeal to a lot of men and have helped them, have helped them to get into shape, have helped them to make money, have helped them to, just sort of stop doing some of the things that we've been talking about. So I don't want to like throw the baby out with the bathwater. However, when you take mature masculinity out of the picture, what will fill its void is adolescent masculinity. And adolescent masculinity is what a lot of those guys embody. It's hyper aggressive, it's very volatile and combative. Um,
Juvenile in its nature.
it's pretty juvenile. I mean, you see some of these guys like I mean, the one that I just always come back to is like what's his name, like Myron from Fresh and Fit. I really have a hard time, I think, in
Okay.
some ways, because he talks about a lot of these values of masculinity that are good, but then his behavior is very adolescent. Screaming and yelling and just like losing his shit all the time. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's I think when you've been around really mature men and you've been around elder men, they don't do that. They just don't do that. And so it's such a sign of immaturity. And so I think there's a rise because initiation in our Western culture, especially in the United States and somewhat Canada, is more about the fraternity model of initiation, right? It's like, I'm going to haze you into manhood. It's like, well, you can't do that. You can't haze a man into manhood. There's a great quote by Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan monk. He says, unless a man goes on a journey of powerlessness, he will always abuse power. Unless a man goes on a journey of powerlessness, he will always abuse power. That's what initiation is meant to do, is to put you into contact with the big question of who do you as a man become when you feel powerless? Because for most men, when they feel powerless, that's where all their shit comes out. That's where the coping mechanisms and the volatility and the hostility and the aggression and the fighting, all of that comes up when they feel powerless. And what most men need to realize is that there are some things in life that are just bigger than them. And so what happens for a lot of men is they create these kind of pseudo initiations where they implode their life to simulate an initiatory process where they feel powerless and helpless. But I think that there's a rise of them because, the internet loves that
Sensationalist. Yeah.
tumultuous, yeah, sensationalized, like super volatile. It's hijacking your nervous system, really, is what it is. And the more that they can bring on OnlyFans, chicks who just have like ridiculous delusional opinions and perspectives, and be like, see, this is what all women today look like and sound like, it reinforces the narrative that some men are carrying. So I think that's how they've really become popular. And I think that is shifting right now. I think that you're going to start to see more and more grounded, mature men rise to prominence, as a lot of guys have watched these channels for years and it's the same BS and they've hit a ceiling and a plateau and they're like, this isn't really working for me. I'm still single. I don't have a lot of money. Now I'm just really angry all the time. Now what do I do? And I think there's going to be a migration towards, more mature masculine role models that are teaching a more grounded way of being in the world that's sustainable and that is really about a movement towards elderhood at some point in life.
I think that's a really positive note for us to wrap up on, Connor. And I certainly hope that that's where we're headed. And I'm a huge fan of everything you're doing over at ManTalks. Really, really enjoy your content. Think it's a really positive force, and a phrase that you'll have heard many times on different podcasts. I think you're acting as a rising tide, and the ships are going with you. And I think that's what really masculine, traditional, positive men can do for younger listeners and younger audience members. And I think that's got to be the aim. If the audience want to continue the conversation with you, where should they head towards?
Yeah, you can go to, well, first off, thank you very much for all that. And thank you for the conversation. You had some really solid questions today. And I love that you've done your homework. Yeah, I mean, just head on over to mantalks.com. You can find me on YouTube. It's just ManTalks, all one word, ManTalks, or Instagram. Pretty active in both of those places. And feel free to fire me off a message or just comment on one of my videos. I try and respond to all of my DMs and respond to all the comments that I can. And it is me; it's not somebody else. I really try and take pride in that. And then check out my book, Men's Work. It's really a solid read that tens and tens and tens of thousands of men have loved. And there's a ton of work in it that you can do. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Connor. And thank you to the listener. I'll be back to speak to you guys again very, very soon.